Some folks join a homeowners association for community. I joined Lake Serenity Estates for the fishing. 20 years retired from teaching history, I just wanted peace, quiet, and early mornings on the water. Never thought I'd be fighting for my home against a power-hungry HOA president with a rulebook thicker than my dissertation. And they certainly didn't know who was waiting in the wings when they came for my house. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that's gone off the rails, you'll want to hear this story. Make sure to like and subscribe, and share your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. I read every single one. It started simply enough. Last winter, I took a nasty fall on my icy porch steps, bad enough to require hip surgery. At 68, I'm not as spry as I used to be. My doctor recommended installing a wheelchair ramp and some handrails to make getting in and out of my home safer during recovery. Nothing fancy, Robert, Dr. Martinez told me. Just something functional to prevent another fall. I called a local contractor, Hank. Good man, been working in Lake Serenity Estates for 15 years. He drew up plans for a modest ramp that would blend with my home's exterior, using materials similar to my existing deck. HOA approval shouldn't be an issue for this, Hank said, scratching his head. It's a medical necessity. Famous last words. I submitted the request to the HOA, led by our new president, Margaret Wilson. She'd moved in just 2 years prior and somehow managed to take control of the board, replacing all the reasonable folks who'd been running things since the community's founding in '98. 2 weeks passed with no response. Then a letter arrived, not approval, but a request for additional information. They wanted engineering specs, materials analysis, and a visual impact study for a simple wheelchair ramp. I called Margaret directly. This seems like a lot for a temporary medical accommodation, I said, keeping my voice even. Robert, we have standards to maintain, she replied, her voice tight as a new shoelace. Everyone thinks their modification is necessary. Where does it end? I explained it was for my hip surgery recovery. Perhaps you should consider moving to a more suitable residence if your home no longer meets your needs, she suggested, dripping with condescension. That should have been my warning sign. With surgery scheduled in 3 weeks, I couldn't wait any longer. I had Hank install the ramp. It was tasteful, functional, and barely noticeable from the street. I even added some nice planters around it to soften the appearance. The day after my surgery, still groggy from anesthesia, my daughter answered the door to find a violation notice taped to it. $500 fine for unapproved exterior modification. You wouldn't believe what they did next. The fines kept coming, every single day, $500 each. Within a week, I owed $3,500. When I called Margaret again, she said the board had voted unanimously to continue the daily fines until the illegal structure was removed. I'm recovering from major surgery, I said, my patience wearing thin. I can't exactly climb stairs right now. Your medical issues don't exempt you from community rules, Robert, she said coldly. The ramp comes down or the fines continue. My daughter Sarah, who's a paralegal, started researching our options. She discovered the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act both provide protections for reasonable accommodations in housing. They can't do this. Dad, she said, showing me the relevant statutes, this is discrimination, plain and simple. We sent a formal letter citing these laws and requesting an emergency meeting with the HOA board. They finally agreed to meet 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the fines continued to accumulate. I was now facing over $10,000 in penalties, and Margaret had sent a letter threatening to place a lien on my property if the fines weren't paid by the end of the month. The community meeting was tense. I arrived with Sarah, my walker, and a folder full of documentation. The board members sat behind a long table like a tribunal, Margaret presiding with a self-satisfied smirk. "Mr. Henderson," she began, "you've willfully violated community bylaws and ignored multiple cease and desist orders. The board has been more than patient, I countered, keeping my voice steady. You've been fining a disabled retiree $500 a day for a medical necessity. That's not patience, it's harassment. I explained the ADA and Fair Housing Act requirements. Zara provided additional legal citations. For a moment I thought we might be getting through to them, then Margaret dropped the bombshell. The board has voted to begin eviction proceedings. You have 30 days to remove the ramp and pay all accumulated fines, or we'll file for foreclosure. The room went silent. Even the other board members looked shocked. You can't be serious, Sarah said, standing up. That's illegal retaliation for requesting a reasonable accommodation. Margaret just smiled. Rules are rules, and in Lake Serenity Estates, we enforce them. If this HOA sounds unbelievable already, make sure to hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how this ends. I left that meeting feeling defeated. My home, paid for in full after 30 years of teaching, was under threat. All because I needed a ramp to get into my house after surgery. That night, I made a call I hadn't made in years. To my younger brother, Michael. "Mike," I said when he answered, "I need your advice on a legal matter." Michael and I have always been close, despite our different career paths. While I chose teaching, he went to law school and worked his way up to become a federal judge. We don't talk as often as we should, but we're there when it matters. I explained the situation, the ramp, the fines, the eviction threat. He listened patiently, asking occasional questions. "Send me everything you have," he said finally. "The HOA bylaws, all their letters, your documentation, and Sarah's research too." 3 days later, Michael called back. "Robert, they've violated at least 3 federal laws. This isn't just a local issue anymore." He explained that not only were they violating housing discrimination laws, but their fines were punitive and unreasonable, and the eviction threat constituted illegal retaliation. "I can't represent you personally since I'm sitting on the federal bench," he said, "but I know exactly who can help, and I might be able to ensure your case gets heard in the right courtroom." The next day, Sarah and I met with the attorney Michael recommended, Elena Rodriguez, a sharp disability rights lawyer with a track record of taking on HOAs. "They've made a serious mistake targeting you, Robert," Eleanor said after reviewing our case. "And they're about to learn a very expensive lesson. With Elena's guidance, we filed a federal lawsuit against the HOA, naming Margaret and the board members personally. We sought an immediate injunction to stop the fines and eviction proceedings, plus damages for discrimination and emotional distress. The response from the HOA was swift and vicious. Margaret sent out a community newsletter painting me as a rule-breaking troublemaker who was endangering property values with my illegal ramp. She even included a picture of my house with the ramp circled in. Read. Some neighbors bought her story. Others, who'd known me for nearly 20 years, were more supportive. My next-door neighbor, Helen, 87 years old and sharp as a tack, organized a petition supporting my right to the accommodation. The day before our injunction hearing, Margaret made her most aggressive move yet. She had a formal eviction notice delivered to my door, complete with a court date for foreclosure proceedings. "They're trying to intimidate you," Elena said when I called her, panicking. "It's a bluff. They don't have the legal authority to do this without a court order, which they don't have." Still, seeing that official notice shook me to my core. This was really happening. The HOA was trying to take my home. The injunction hearing was set for Monday morning. Elena and I arrived early at the federal courthouse. The HOA had hired a slick attorney from a big firm downtown, who arrived with Margaret and 2 other board members in tow. "Mr. Henderson," Margaret said as they passed, "I suggest you consider settling this before you embarrass yourself further." "We have deep pockets and excellent legal counsel," I just nodded, keeping my composure. Elena squeezed my arm reassuringly. We were called into courtroom 3B. As we entered, I noticed the judge already seated at the bench. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. Then he looked up, and our eyes met. "It was Michael, brother of mine," he said with a slight smile, then composed himself. "I should recuse myself, but given the shortage of federal judges available today and the urgent nature of this injunction, I'll proceed if all parties consent." The HOA attorney jumped up immediately. "Your Honor, we object." "There's an obvious conflict of interest here." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And what conflict would that be, Counselor?" "This judge is the plaintiff's brother." The attorney sputtered. "Is he now?" Michael said, feigning surprise. "Well, I'll be—" "Robert Henderson, is that true?" I nodded, trying not to smile. "Yes, Your Honor." "Remarkable coincidence," Michael said dryly. "However, my relationship to the plaintiff doesn't change the law. Do you have any legal objection to my hearing this case, or are you just hoping for a more favorable judge?" The HOA attorney floundered for a moment before conceding. "No further objection, Your Honor." "Very well," Michael said. "Let's proceed." What followed was a masterclass in judicial handling. Michael listened patiently to both sides, asked pointed questions, and showed no favoritism toward me. If anything, he was tougher on Elena, forcing her to cite specific statutes and precedents. When the HOA attorney claimed the ramp significantly altered the community's aesthetic, Michael asked, "Have you seen the ramp in question?" "No, Your Honor," the attorney admitted. "Then how can you testify to its aesthetic impact?" Michael asked, his tone dangerous. The hearing lasted 2 hours. At the end, Michael didn't immediately rule. Instead, he requested additional documentation from both sides and scheduled a continuation for the following week. Outside the courtroom, Margaret was furious. "This is a setup," she yelled at me in the hallway. "You planned this." "I planned needing hip surgery," I replied calmly. "Margaret, this has gone far enough. Drop this now before it costs you and the association even more." "Never," she spat. "We'll see you in court." The following week we returned to courtroom 3B. This time, Michael was ready to rule. After careful consideration of the evidence and applicable law, he began. "This court finds that the Lake Serenity Estates HOA has willfully violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and has engaged in illegal retaliation against Mr. Henderson for requesting a reasonable accommodation. He granted the injunction, stopping all fines and eviction proceedings immediately. But he didn't stop there. The court further finds that the fines imposed, totaling $17,500 at last count, are punitive and unreasonable. They are hereby vacated. Additionally, given the willful nature of these violations, the court awards Mr. Henderson $50,000 in compensatory damages and $100,000 in punitive damages against the HOA and its board members personally. Margaret's face went pale. The HOA attorney looked like he might be sick. Furthermore, Michael continued, the court orders the Lake Serenity Estates HOA to revise its bylaws to comply with federal housing standards within 90 days and to undergo mandatory training on disability rights and reasonable accommodations. He banged the gavel. "Case dismissed." The HOA attorney immediately jumped up. "We'll appeal." Michael looked at him over his glasses. "By all means, Counselor. The Circuit Court of Appeals meets just down the hall. I'm sure they'll be interested to hear how you tried to evict a disabled retiree for installing a wheelchair ramp. The appeal never came. What happened next was almost more satisfying than the court victory. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover the damages, citing the board's willful misconduct. Margaret and the other board members were personally liable for the $150,000 judgment. At the next HOA election, Margaret and her allies were voted out in a landslide. Helen, my 87-year-old neighbor, became the new president, promising reasonable rules for reasonable people. The first thing the new board did: send me an official apology and a plaque for my pioneering advocacy for accessibility in Lake Serenity Estates. The ramp, it's still there, and now 3 other neighbors have installed similar ones, no questions asked. The ironic twist in all this: Margaret, who fought so hard to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the community, had to sell her beautiful lakefront home to pay her share of the judgment. Last I heard, she moved to a condo development with no HOA at all. As for me, I'm enjoying my peaceful retirement again, fishing in the mornings, puttering in my workshop in the afternoons, and occasionally joining Helen for a glass of wine on my ramp, watching the sunset over the lake. Life has a funny way of working out. Sometimes the people who think they're enforcing the rules are the ones breaking them. And sometimes the person you need in your corner is family you haven't talked to in too long. If you've ever faced down an HOA that's forgotten it exists to serve residents, not control them, I hope my story gives you hope. Stand your ground, know your rights, and you never know who might have your back. What's the most outrageous HOA violation you've ever received or heard about? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of everyday people standing up to injustice. Thanks for watching.